Well, hello, and welcome back to the WAFFLE-FREE Storytelling Podcast. It's Tina Konstant here. As always, the waffle is in the show notes. In the meantime, here's a brand new story created by yours truly, inspired by current events. Now, the start of the story is way back in the mists of time when there were no rules and no real worries, and the world was quite small. The sun floated across the sky day after day, and as he did that, he looked down at the people playing and laughing, and as you would too, he felt left out and wanted nothing more than to join in. So to get the people's attention, he beamed his biggest and best smile, but no one paid him any heed. So again, he did what anyone would do. He reached out. But as the tip of his rays hit the earth, the ground hissed and singed and turned black, and the people, in their fear and surprise and terror, ran and scurried and hid away. Now the sun didn't care what they played as long as they played, and this game of hide-and-seek was hugely amusing. So he reached down all over the globe, putting his fingers in the ocean and the lakes and the puddles and the streams, the forest, the woods, the meadows, the fields and the villages. Now while all of this was happening, there was an old woman who lived in a cottage at the edge of a forest. She watched the people run and panic, and as they did, she sat on her rocking chair, a cup of tea by her side, and her knitting in her lap. And as she knitted, she sang and hummed and told stories. Now all around her, the people ran and screamed and yelled about how badly the sun was behaving, but no one thought to stop and ask the woman why she was so calm. Until finally, one day, a young man, furious that his crops had just been burnt to ashes, stopped at the woman's garden fence and yelled at her, "How can you just sit there? The world is falling apart and you're not doing anything!" The old woman smiled at the young man. "It seems," she said, "with all your panic and yelling, you're not doing anything either." The young man paused long enough to let her words sink in. Then he said, "But what can I do? The sun is so big, the problem is so huge, how can I fix it?" The old woman reached into her basket at her feet. She pulled out a ball of bright green wool. She cradled it in her hands, kissed it, and handed it to the young man. "All the sun ever wanted," she said, "was a friend. He wants to play. Take the ball, but follow this one rule. Throw the ball, catch the ball, but don't drop it." At first the young man was confused. But since the people had tried everything else, and since the woman looked so calm and so confident, he decided to give it a go. So he went into a field, called to the sun, and threw the ball as hard as his might would let him. The ball sailed through the clouds, across the sky, past the moon, and right in front of the sun, who was amazed. The sun immediately rolled after the ball, caught it, rolled back, and tossed it back to the man. Laughing, the man caught the ball and threw it back, and so the game began. With every throw, the man remembered what the old woman said. Throw the ball, catch the ball, but never drop it. Generation after generation, the ball was passed down. The sun was entertained, and the scorched earth healed. Green grasses grew, rivers flowed, oceans flourished. But as each generation was born into more and more comfort, the reason for the game, and more important, the warning from the old woman, got forgotten. Until one day, the people who had inherited the ball passed the ball, fumbled the ball, and finally dropped the ball. The sun hung in the sky and waited. He searched for the ball. He waited for his playmates, but they had moved indoors. They had ignored him. They had stopped looking up. They had stopped playing. This angered the sun more than you can imagine. Without hesitation, he reached down and he pressed his hand into a forest, turning it to ash. But because the people were indoors, they didn't notice. Furious, the sun burned his rays into the lakes and then the streams and then ice, turning it to fire. And still, no one looked up. So the sun, as anyone who's ignored long enough will do, burned with a fury until the earth was as scorched as it was in the old woman's day. It was only then, at last, that people noticed. But because most of them had forgotten the start of the story, they just ran and screamed and hid. Some of them searched for the ball, but no matter how hard they looked, they couldn't find it. They blamed each other, they blamed the gods, they blamed the sun. Then, when almost all was lost, a group of children who had been born when the fires already burned and knew nothing of the comfort and luxury of a cool place to sit in the rays of a friendly sun, came across the house at the edge of the woods. The rocking chair was still there. The basket with the wool and the needles was still there. The front door was slightly ajar. One of the children, a young girl, went into the house. It was cool and quiet, like the person who lived there had just stepped out. The girl was curious. She flipped through the books on the wide shelf and saw that they told a story of the world right from the beginning. And when she came to the last page of the last book, she saw a picture of her and her friends standing in front of the old woman's house. There were no more words, but the page pulsated with life, like it was waiting for the next story to be written. So the young girl went outside. She sat on the rocking chair, she picked up the needles, and she started to knit. And as she went, she picked up a ball of bright green wool. She cradled the ball in her hands. She kissed it, and she handed it to her friends. "We have a second chance," she said. "The ball is ours. There is only one condition. Throw the ball. Catch the ball. But don't ever drop it." And the children of the fire, as they became known, went into a field, and they threw the ball. Now at first the sun, angry as he was, ignored them, but they threw it again and again. And while they did that, the old folks laughed and jeered at their efforts, but the children recognized the laughter as fear and embarrassment that the old folks felt because they were the ones who dropped the ball in the first place. The more the children threw the ball at the sun, the more the sun calmed his fury and paid them attention until finally the sun stopped scorching the earth and chased the ball, tossing it back into the safe hands of the young ones. And while the friends played, the young girl travelled the world and wrote the one true law in stone. She shared it in every language and in every corner of the world. Throw the ball, catch the ball, but do not, under any circumstances, drop the ball. And that is the history of the world so far. And that's also it from the Waffle-Free Storytelling Podcast this week. So if you want the waffle, check out the show notes or drop around to www.tinakonstant.com where you can come and say hello. All right, have a glorious week, and I'll see you next week for more madness and mayhem. Bye-bye now.